Women who've done time. What was women's prison like? Not me, but an ex's older sister got 3 DUIs and the last one meant she did a few weeks in jail. She was hot but in a trashy way. One of the first things she said she learned was how to make a prison dildo out of a toilet paper roll, saran wrap, napkins and a rubber band. She said she didn't use one, but she said it was more sexual there than she expected. She's a fine member of society now, but just had a bit of a reckless stage. Still makes me chuckle thinking about that prison dildo though. Edit, a word. Mom was a corrections officer for a long time, so she worked in a jail, not prison. She said there was a ton of drama and sex in the women's unit compared to the men's. She referred to it as working with the itches. Lol, I miss my frickin' mom. As someone who's spent time in jail, yes, the same jail my mom worked at, I can tell you drama in the men's unit is usually at a 0 or a 10. The women's unit was probably more of a constant 6. The itches just walked around like they were in a high school dorm, haha. My mom went to prison when I was a junior in high school. She was innocent. The other people had more money and our lawyer was complete shit. Long story short, she was in there for about a 1/2 years. There's a lot of girls who either are or one and they tend to be les. They're literally horny all the time. I remember being 18 and visiting my mom, and a few of the younger inmates had looked over at me a couple times and had given that BJ look with their tongue against their cheek. Another thing is cleanliness. A lot of things get missed. Inmates pretty much do most the work around the prison, and my mom knew some people in the kitchen and they had been cleaning one day and figured they would open up the meat grinder because it hadn't been cleaned for a while. As they opened it, they found about 1 million maggots inside it. Basically it hadn't been cleaned a lot longer than people thought, and the whole prison had been eating maggot meat. My sis is in juvie and she's the only girl there. They are in separate areas, but she basically in solitary confinement. Says it sucks. What did she do? She stole a TV in an electronics store next to a donut shop. She ran out with the TV, and a cop from the donut shop chased her. When the cop grabbed her, she dropped the TV on his foot. They said she threw the TV. She got like 10 years in the clink for that shit. Edit, none of yo damn business. A high school ex-girlfriend of mine went to laddie jail for prescription drug use. She said that all the inmates would bark at her when she walked by because she was the puppy of the pound. She got an improvised tattoo from a wood staple in a mechanical pencil, and apparently they have a lot of freedom there. We exchanged letters. I've been to jail twice. No prison though. Most people told me I didn't look like I belonged in jail. Gave me the WTF did you do to land here? One of the male guards flirted with me about my tattoos. Mainly I just keep to myself until I got out though. I was the only blonde girl there when I went. I'm not a woman, and I haven't done time, but my mum did. It was before I was born, and though I never knew why she got locked up because she would never tell me. I think it was something to do with prostitution or breaking and entering. Though she was still naturally beautiful, prison had done a lot of damage to her physically. She'd had her nose broken in multiple places, so it was really crooked and busted in. She would tell me how some of the bigger women in prison would try to sexually assault her. Grape, I guess. But how? In her own words, and I love this about her, that she would take the beatings of her life before she would let them do that to her. She was only a small woman, not much over 5 feet 2 and was pretty skinny. But she had the heart of a giant. So I'm sure she would have made it hell for anyone trying to take advantage of her like that. She passed away from a drink driving accident when I was 16. She was an alcoholic, and though she'd defeated a lot in her life, alcohol was something she couldn't. So, woman's prison sounded like a rough place coming from her. I really miss her, and I wish I could have asked her more about it and the rest of her life before she had me. But no matter what, though she was a bit of an outcast to society, she was and will always be my hero. Love you, mum. Probably late to the party, but the best way I can describe it is like a boarding school full of every type of female you can imagine. I spent about 2 months at a facility with around 400 women, whose charges ranged from small petty crimes to rape and murder. Everyone had their own cliches that they kept to, but there was a lot of stupid drama. Try to think of the most troubled girls from high school, and then imagine 400 of them stuck together in a place that is miserable, where they are isolated from their family and the rest of society. That's basically the gist of it. But like any community, there are good people and bad people, and most of the time you can find a like-minded individual to make friends with. The facility I was at had a huge library, pretty good food, and cable TV. So I considered myself lucky in that aspect. I mostly kept to myself and read a lot, and I never got into any fights, and stayed out of trouble for the most part. Drugs and contraband still got in a lot. That always made things interesting. I met some really strange people, and saw women who committed unspeakable crimes. It opened my eyes to a lot of things I had never seen before. Overall though, my time wasn't as bad as it could have been, and I learned some things, and hopefully I will never go back. Man who has worked in various prisons here. I will take a men's over women's any day of the week. She's scary. Men will act aggressive to assert dominance. It may escalate to violence, but a lot of the time it is just a matter of one guy wanting the other to submit. And the level of violence may stay mild if someone backs off. Women aren't as prone to that sort of physical domination. When a woman decides to fight another, she wants to hurt her. The escalation to severe violence can be quite sudden, and less likely to end just because someone backs down. My mom has had a couple of stints in jail prison. I could always ask her if she'd be willing to do an AMA. She's definitely made some poor choices and served time for those choices, and she isn't shy about it. Especially if it were to be in a somewhat anonymous fashion such as Reddit. I'm a jail deputy who oversees women inmates as part of my daily assignments. I can answer any questions anyone has. I must caution that jail is not prison, but I can tell you about women inmates at my level if anyone is interested. I had an ex and a good friend that were both locked up. Different times but in the same state. They both pretty much reported the same stuff. A lot of drugs. Had people offering them prescription pills immediately upon entry. A dearth of good books. And asshole guards. The ex didn't get undergarments for the first week she was there for literally no reason other than someone forgot to give her them at some point and they didn't want to admit to it. The friend is a strict, whole life vegan and they wouldn't give her veggie meals, even though they are supposed to. She ended up having to eat only bread and apples the entire time she was there. Lost a ton of weight and still has digestive problems to this day. Mind you, both of these women were model prisoners, scared white girls from middle class families that made straight A's in school. Both went in for drug alcohol issues, and they still got treated like shit. I can only imagine what it must be like for the troublemakers. I can tell you from my experience working at one that females are the most stressful inmates to deal with. They nag and itch constantly and will get pleasure out of giving you a hard time in the most childish ways imaginable. It's even worse for the female employees. I worked in jail on women's units for a while. Had a girl come up to me and tell me the cologne I used, I hadn't worn it in 4 days. Is she like half dog? I was a volunteer tutor at a juvenile detention center. The boys and girls were separated. The boys were pretty well behaved and polite. The girls' program was shut down due to an incident. That happened over 5 years ago. The director of the program told us he tries not to remember what shut it down, but told us the boys are much easier to handle than the girls. He looked like a man who had seen some things. My dad used to work in a women's prison. He told me that most of the women there were really nice people. I can imagine women's prisons are mostly a lot less dangerous. What country? I can imagine that the case in Switzerland or the Netherlands. The ladies I saw in jail in the US. I can absolutely not say that about Canada. Edit, to be fair. From what I've heard, Canada's men's prisons are much more legitimate as well. Damn shame they cancelled the prison farm program. The town I live in had 3 prisons, 2 of which have been closed. So it's not like all those prison shows where they are all nice to each other and use crayons as birthday candles with a cake made of whatever was in the cafeteria that day. They do actually. Using commissary items they make cakes. They can actually taste pretty good too. On Halloween we let them dress up. The stuff they came up with was truly creative and incredible. I spent a Monday through Friday in jail a couple weeks ago after some troubles from earlier this year. There's not a lot I can say about my time because I spent the whole week sitting in a cell by myself trying to go back to sleep. No one to talk to and no way to leave. It was just me in a room with a slot in the door for food. I didn't ask for anything or attempt to communicate with officers because I ultimately just wanted to be as inoffensive as possible and not cause any trouble. It was freezing cold. At least to someone who had 0 physical movement. And there was no way to tell time. I counted breakfast and reread again my paperwork stating how phone calls worked and when I'd get out. All in all I found it very draining. Mentally exhausting just trying to keep occupied while having 0 stimulus. Jail food is not as bad as elementary school food was. The officer who released me seemed excited to have a good job that day where he's dealing with people who want to put their real clothes back on and gtfo. Technically I was in women's prison. Though it was 5 days. So all I can comment on is the fact that the overcrowding thing can be real laugh. The cells held 2 bunk beds each. And the entire hallway was lined with extra bunk beds because it was over full. There's a whole lot of prison officers, 95% good and 5% bad, reading these comments now. I'm one myself. Let me tell you. There is some shit that goes on in prison that you wouldn't believe. This type of crap is committed by the 5%. Please don't believe that every officer is corrupt, uncaring, indifferent. Last night I talked a prisoner out of a noose and his weapons with no violence from either party. Tonight when I checked up on him he asked for Panadol, Tylenol, I guess, and I didn't have any so he threatened to kill me and grape my wife and kids. This kind of shit and worse is what we as good officers put up with daily. So please, members of the public, if we seem a bit stressed, just remember what we do to keep you safe. Prisoners. If we seem preoccupied it's because we have huge caseloads. Sometimes hundreds of others and can't spend all our time dealing with you. One of my friends did time. She was in 2 different prisons. In one she had to work hoeing fields in a chain gang with guns pointed at her. In the other, she had prison guards bringing her Subway and she worked at the store. She said there was a baller there and it was easy.